So with this session we'll be recording this part, but we won't be recording the presentation by the NDIS team. So just to let people know that, so you might want to take a few more notes or things like that in that session, because it may not be available in the same way. Okay, so our next speaker is Daryl Starkey. Daryl is a member of the NDIS, National Disability Service State Council or Committee. He's also a member of the Victorian Community Sector Reform Council. He leads one of the larger, if not the largest, disability service down in the Barwon region, and certainly one of the two major mental health service providers in Barwon. And as such, he's had a great deal of practical experience, not just in thinking about what NDIS, the scheme, might mean, but he's actually been tested in can he make it work within his organisation. I've seen him do a version of this presentation before and it's a bit jaw-dropping, so get ready. Here we go.
Thanks, Kim, and good morning to everybody. Can you hear me down the back okay? Right. I'd like to put this presentation into some context, and I'll go back to when the NDIS campaign started. Karingal was very much a strong supporter of the campaign, and not only for the scheme, but also for the Barwon region to be the trial site for Victoria. We were chosen by the Victorian Government and the Commonwealth Government to be the trial site in Victoria. There was a range of reasons for that. You don't see anything in writing, but I think it had something to do with the established service providers in the Barwon region, some of the natural geographic boundaries, because you can be in a trial area where on one side of the street you might be eligible to be in the NDIS, on the other you're not. But I think the strength of the service providers, I've heard quite a few of the politicians, state and federal, suggest that was one of the reasons. Plus we had a mixture of urban and rural, because our Barwon area extends down to Colac as well. But it is the most intense trial site of any of the trial sites in Australia, and therein lies one of the challenges that we've had. We couldn't register as a service provider until just before the scheme started, the 19th of June last year. The scheme started on the 1st of July. We did not know what prices we were going to be paid at that time. Then when the prices did come out, the one-to-one support rate was 15% or thereabouts below what the sector believed it should be. There was a disappointing aspect. Initially, we weren't welcome at participant planning meetings. We understand why. The NDIS was really about client or participant choice. However, service providers are a key component to the makeup of what services occur. And unfortunately, many of our clients or participants or their family carers did not completely understand what made up their service. So we had plans completed which there were gaps in, and to try and fix those gaps was incredibly difficult and took weeks and months to get them sorted through. There have been some significant changes now, I hasten to add, and service providers can attend planning meetings when required. Policy on the run, I'll give you an example of that. That's still happening to some extent. It's better than what it was. But in the early days, or the first 12 months, really, the policies were just way underdeveloped. And I think from my perspective, the most disappointing aspect in that first 9 to 12 months was the lack of collaboration with service providers. We were used to collaborating with the Department of Human Services, VICSERV back in those Commonwealth days, and whilst we always had our battles, I'm sure, but there wasn't much room for collaboration with service providers. We saw it as a joint effort, particularly when the previous former federal government brought in the scheme 1 year early, which is why we had such a mess to contend with in the first 12 months or so. So I'm relaying here some experiences that Karingal has suffered. I'll use that word, suffered. We're told we are the largest service provider in any of the trial regions in Australia, and the Barwon region being the most intense trial site, it just exacerbated the problems that were there. We couldn't even invoice to get some money until the 28th of October. Sorry, was that a question, sir?
I was just going to ask what you meant by intense.
The speediest rollout, the quickest rollout. So the most number of participants, whereas in the Hunter region, for example, in New South Wales, those, even though it was a bigger cohort of people, 10,000 compared to 5,000 participants in Barwon, that was being done over a longer period of time. There were significant problems, and still are, with the NDIA portal. Fortunately, we've got systems development people, but so we've got our own technical experts, but they were having problems too. And I think NDIA did try and work that through with our systems people as well. There was no independent participant complaints process, and I still don't think there is one of those yet. There was no standard client participant contract, which we think should be the way to go, that we shouldn't have to develop our own contract, but that's what we've had to do, and it's taken until very recently for us to roll that out. We've had substantial additional unfunded resources, staff chiefly, that we've had to have to help this rollout, and it's still ongoing. We had the in-kind funding debacle. I'm not sure if you know what that means. It's really hard to explain, but the transfer of funding from the states and some Commonwealth departments to the NDIA, that resulted in a large debt to us and some other service providers. For example, at one stage we have had a bit over $2 million in outstanding debts from NDIA, and I've just turned that off. So this slide's been shown in many places, and apologies if you have already seen it, but that's building a plane while it's flying in mid-air. And so that's what it felt like, and that's what in the capability review, the independent one that was done earlier this year, that's the photo that they showed of what it felt like. So that was a capability review in January this year. It was like a plane that took off before it had been fully built, and it's been completed while it's in the air. So their findings that were released in March this year, that the agency was launched prematurely, that they were designing the scheme at the same time, they were really focused on short-term targets, not on learning from the trial, and that haste was going to undermine quality, the systems weren't fit for purpose, and the NDIA board, the governance board, was only appointed 12 days before the launch. This was the major work they said that needed to be required. There needed to be service provider development, and some of that has been happening. Needed to be development of the workforce, because it's anticipated that a large number of additional workers will be required. We haven't quite seen that in the Barwon region at this stage. Housing is a major issue. There's recurrent funding, support funding available for supported accommodation, but there's no capital, so there's no more capital developments happening, and we're waiting for an NDIA to release a housing paper, hopefully in the near future, because we need to get some more housing built, because the ongoing support funding is there, but the places are just not available. Market regulation and design. Well, we all thought that there was going to be this big new market, all these for-profit organisations and other larger not-for-profits coming into the region. And whilst they have registered as providers, we're not really finding much additional competition at this stage. There's really not the scale for the bigger players, but it's been suggested that the Boopers of the world will enter the market at some stage as it rolls out across Australia. The transitioning of participants into the NDIS. We'd have to say this worked quite well, the method that was chosen down in the Barwon region. Not everybody agrees, but they did it by service type, and we think that was a logical way for that to happen. So we had a progressive phasing in from July last year till just recently, and quite rightly the people that were on the disability support register or the waiting list, they were given the highest priority, so that was really good that those people that were waiting for support got it first. And I think there's around about 4,000 participants in the Barwon trial area that have come across, or first year or thereabouts. And it generally has been a positive experience for participants waiting for new or increased supports and equipment. So there is quite a bit of positive things happening, maybe less so in the mental health area. The 12-monthly review, the average size of the packages was 34,000. They've really budgeted for around about 35,000, so that's about on target. The package size initially was 46,000. We're not quite sure why that is, whether it was the people who had higher needs first got bigger packages. The planning is certainly sped up. It was very slow in the first 6 months, but it's really notched up now. And participant satisfaction rated by NDIS is up at 94%. And until recently there were 1,350 registered service providers in the trial areas.
That average size of placements, that's per person, that 34,000 like packages?
Yes. Yes. This is a slide, it's been like a tornado for service providers, and this is what it's really felt. And we can now see this is happening in mental health, so you need to brace yourself, and I'm not joking, I'm serious. The Joint Parliamentary Committee in April this year, we presented at that committee in camera, but it was all on the record. We raised all of those concerns up there, some of those that I've mentioned. And that last one, you know, we're competing for staff with NDIA. We've also got TAC down in Geelong as well. So they're paid significantly higher than our staff. So that's a bit of a challenge. We haven't lost a huge number of staff, but across the service providers there certainly has been. And so there should be. There should be people with service provider experience working in the NDIA office. So I'm not saying it shouldn't happen, but it's just one of the challenging factors that we have. And just to move on more to our current experience, there's over 400 registered service providers in Barwon, but some of those are sole traders, physiotherapists, taxi companies, interstate service providers have registered as well, but we're not seeing that much activity outside of the traditional service provider network. There's some movement, and some of the bigger players that weren't in Barwon are certainly there and perhaps trying to establish themselves. We're going through what we call a business process re-engineering exercise at the moment. I guess I wish we'd had done this some time ago, but we didn't really know what we were trying to re-engineer because we didn't know how the system was going to work. But I'd suggest that you all consider this. It doesn't have to be some fancy term, but you really need to make sure that you are delivering services efficiently and effectively, because there is the prices that are being paid for mental health services and some disability services, there's just no margins there. So you have to make absolutely sure that you're delivering services at the right amount, that you're perhaps not over-servicing unless your board wants to pay for that over-servicing. So we're going through our services one by one to make sure that we're not over-servicing, that we're doing things right. Because if we want to challenge the prices that are being paid, we need to show some hard evidence, and hopefully NDIA and service providers will come to some agreement if the costs are not right, if the price is not right. Communication is extremely important. I think that's something that we've done reasonably well, perhaps not 100%, but you need to be developing communication strategies and plans of how you do that, because it is particularly challenging in the mental health area of how to communicate. I'm not telling you anything new, but you need to develop your own strategies so that your participants, your clients can feel supported through this and their families. So it is really critical that if you haven't got your own in-house expertise, that you contract somebody in to assist you. As I mentioned earlier, we developed our own client or participant service contract. That's still being sort of somewhat tested at the moment. We're trying to get some feedback. It is quite complicated when you get your legal advice mixed in with your service delivery. Trying to get that balance is a real challenge, because we don't want to make it difficult for people, our clients, to understand. But at the same time, we've got to protect ourselves, because your contract is with the client now, not with the funder, although it doesn't seem like that sometimes. The unfunded, unbillable work, we've just written to David Barwon a couple of weeks ago. We were prepared to wear some unfunded additional resource costs as part of the trial. It's cost us several hundreds of thousands of dollars, but it's not diminishing. And so we've written to NDIA and asked them to have a look at the situation, because Karingal is reasonably financial, because we deliver employment services that produce us a surplus. But there's many standalone disability service or mental health providers that do not have the luxury of a solid balance sheet. And so you are going to need some support to help you transition through this exercise, because I can't see how you can do it without additional resources. We wish we could, but we've still got additional staff employed. So we put our hand up and said, help, we need help, and certainly other providers too.
Peter, just about this unfunded and unbillable, is there any indication that activity is going to continue in the service delivery phase, or is it simply connected with the... It's
happening in the service delivery phase now with our disability, and the mental health's just being transitioned, but in the disability service, people got their plans, they're going back for reviewed plans, and we're still incurring the cost, because we're still having to sort out plans and just billing in our accounting area as well. It's quite messy. I know it is a trial and we've got to work through these things. We're just saying that service providers need some transitional support. You can't just give it to peak bodies, which is great that NDIS and VICSERV have been given some funding to help governance and whatever, but service providers need some financial assistance on the ground. Enough is enough, is what we're saying.
The worry must be that if it continues in service delivery in the long term, then it's going to continue to be a running sore for providers unless it's on the funding arrangement. Yep.
Correct, but people like Eddie Bartnick are doing a lot of work behind the scenes. We're just saying that to resolve the mental health service delivery needs some time to work through it properly. So in the meantime, why don't you give some financial support to service providers so that some of them literally don't go out of business. I know there's the odd one in Geelong that are really going to struggle because that's their main source of income, and whilst we're getting block funding from the state government to the end of December, we've actually recommended to Mitch Fifield that the block funding continue until the end of the trial to give more time to try and sort out the financial issues, let alone people who are not eligible and so on. But I think I've got that a bit further. So my final point there on that slide is the policy on the run. Now, just recently we were told that we needed to provide outcomes evidence, and this was a real shock to us because we're not quite sure what the outcomes was predicated on, because we don't see the detailed plans. And so this was just another example to us of policy on the run. Now, I'm sure NDIA will have their reasons for that, and perhaps I can state it to you after my presentation. So we're developing our systems further. The bulk uploading of invoices, that's been happening for a little while now, and that's starting to work a lot better. Their portal is still not functioning properly. The planning processes are still not working efficiently. They're much better than they were in the early days. The stress on our management is taking its toll. You know, it really is, and I won't go into individual circumstances, but I can tell you our managers are really feeling it. And the viability of two of our branches, I'm talking about one of our disability branches in the Barwon area. We've got some outside the Barwon area as well, but also our mental health branch. We are really struggling, and it's only through the board being willing to continue to support it through the trial. But if there's no light at the end of the tunnel, we're really going to have to rethink what we do. I mean, we don't want to give up on service, but if you go down the gurgler in the meantime, you've really got to relook at it. So hopefully we can work with the NDIA and government to make it better.
Can I just clarify, when you say those units are under a lot of pressure, do you mean financially?
Yes.
Or workforce,
oh, well,
or combination of all those things?
It's probably a combination, but I was referring to the financial challenges then. But it is difficult, and it's hard on staff morale. You know, people are starting to wonder, should we stay here? Is there a future for us? Because generally speaking, the qualifications that our staff have, and I dare say probably yours, don't seem to be funded with the prices that are being paid. So it's...
How have you found the transition to a more casualised workforce?
Well, we haven't really had a more casualised workforce to speak of, but Sally will correct me if I'm wrong here.
Personal support workers, definitely. You're right. And just probably worth saying our average plan's working out at about 10 grand at the moment, which is a lot less than the 34,000 average.
Right. All right, I'll keep going. So I'm just giving you some high-level challenges here, and I'll go into a bit more detail here. I'll move on to the next slide. So board governance. One of our board directors is presenting at a forum coming up with Leadership Victoria and NDIS pretty soon. So I've taken some of this from there, but you probably need to relook at your mission and your vision, why you exist, and whether you want to operate in this environment. I guess until you taste it, you probably don't know. You need to have a look at your risk profile, what your board's risk appetite is, and do you have the right skill sets on your board. Now I realise you just can't change that overnight, but that's a longer term conversation you may want to have. Management challenges. We started documenting our risks and opportunities well before the NDIS trial commenced. I think it was early last year. We sat down and had a workshop. We tried to identify what the risks are. And as you go to forums like this, you need to start thinking about it, documenting them, showing your board. How are you going to differentiate yourselves from other providers? It's going to be a more competitive marketplace in the not too distant future. It's been strongly suggested that there will be fewer larger players. We've already seen some of that with the mental health recommissioning and the drugs and alcohol recommissioning. So I think it's inevitable. If you look at the aged care sector, employment services and some others, it doesn't matter what government's in, but since the early 90s there's substantial rationalisation occurring, and I think it's going to happen both in disability services and the mental health. Human resource management. Consider the implications on your workforce. Ensuring that your staff and management are trained in person-centred, the individualised new world. Fortunately, we'd had some experience with that with disability services because Victoria, I think, was more progressive than the other states in that area over the past 10 years. And what to communicate to your staff. This is one of the hardest things, what to tell people, because we just didn't know what was going to hit us when it first started. Systems, have a look at what systems you've got. We've invested heavily in new systems, not only just because of the NDIS, but we've been a growing organisation. We've invested quite heavily in financial systems, new payroll, rostering, CRM, customer relationship management. You may or may not need that, but it's something you might want to consider, and definitely risk management. You probably should network with other providers on systems development, because some of them can be quite expensive, so it's working together. Finance, knowing your service costs, understanding what your operational efficiencies are. Hopefully you know that payments are in arrears, it's not block funding up front. That was well on the table a long time ago. You need to be projecting your cash flows. We do it for 5 years, but certainly a minimum of a year out. You need to know what cash is going to be required, and you might need to do some scenarios, worst case, best case, medium case. And as I've mentioned, know that your transitional costs are quite high. Public relations and marketing. I mentioned earlier that you need a communications plan. It doesn't have to be rocket science, but you need a plan. Look at new ways of communicating with your clients and even your staff, whether it's applications on handheld phones. Protect and build your reputation, and that's about communicating a lot with your stakeholders and working alongside of them and with them and for them. Have a marketing plan. Again, you can probably do something quite simple for yourselves, and keep your eye on what's happening in a competitive environment. We regularly do that so that we know and hopefully can be ready if something happens out there. If you notice more ads, more staff ads from a new provider in your area, you need to watch what's happening. So specifically the mental health sector challenges, there are vulnerable clients who are falling through the gaps. The prices are just not right, and if it's not rectified, organisations will go bankrupt. The significant transition costs, the fast transition timelines, it's not allowing for time to adjust. And Eddie Bartnick said at a meeting the other day that the issues in Victoria are so much different to the other states. And I think I heard the early speaker say the Tier 2 supports, they're not sorted out yet, so a lot of work needs to be done in that area. And I also mentioned about key staff, you know, about to leave or thinking about leaving, and we don't want to lose them. So that's my presentation, folks. I've finished on the challenges. If there's any time, but I think I'm just finished on time, so I'll hand back to Kim.